What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel. We are through 8 weeks of the college football season, which means, guys, we are just shy of being 2/3 of the way done with the college football season. I know. This season has flown by. It's gone by very, very fast, and week 8 has taught us some very, very valuable things. And I think the most important thing, and we're going to dive on into it a little bit here, trust no one. This year is going to be filled with chaos and upsets as we go on throughout the rest of October and in November as well. But these are my personal top 5 takeaways, the top 5 things that I learned from watching football in week 8, or I should say from watching college football in week 8. We're going to dive on into it in just a little bit, but before we start, you guys know I got to thank you for all the support the channel has seen. It really does mean a lot to me, and you guys can continue to help show your support by hitting the subscribe button and ringing the bell so you guys know when videos get uploaded. Again, there are more ways than that you can help me. You guys are doing a huge one right now by watching the video, and you guys can do more by liking, commenting, sharing, really anything else you guys are willing and or able to do to help me support this channel. But enough about me. Let's dive on into the top 5 things that I personally, again, there could be more takeaways that you could have taken away from this week. These are the top 5 things that I learned watching college football this week. And we are going to start with kind of what I previewed there in the beginning. It's the kind of trust no one mentality, because I truly do believe that no one is safe this season, and upsets are going to hit every conference in some way. They've already hit some conferences in the past year, and then just this past week, well, there was a pretty shocking one there in Big Ten country as Cooper DeJean's punt return for a touchdown got called back because his hand went above his shoulder. I don't like the call. I did not think it was a good call at all, but nonetheless, you got to play with the hand that you're dealt, and Minnesota was able to walk away with the win. And now, a lot of people said, hey, Iowa's going to go through and win the Big Ten West now after their win over Wisconsin. Well, the Big Ten West is back open. Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa, maybe even Minnesota could be representing the Big Ten West in the Big Ten championship game. So that division is still wide open. And then we almost had a couple, or I should say we almost had 2 shockers out of the Big 12, right? Oklahoma really struggled with UCF, stopped a 2-point conversion to pull away late, and then Texas was up 21-0, had to battle a little bit to try to get by a Houston team that has really struggled so far this season. Same thing with the UCF Knights, right? Like Texas and Oklahoma, what are presumed to be the 2 front runners in the Big 12, and probably still are. In fact, not probably, they still are the 2 front runners there in the Big 12 conference. They really struggled this past week. And you know what? There were some other really, really close calls, like Washington. They almost dropped that game there to Arizona State. Oregon took a little bit to pull away from Washington State. We're going to be talking about some other upsets here later on in the video, so I'm not going to preview too much, but no one is safe this season, not even teams at the very, very top. And you know what? Going into next week, guys, there are a lot of big upset potential games that are going to be happening here next week. While I go and pull that one up, of course, the ones that are going to immediately come to mind is Georgia and Florida, the game going on in Jacksonville. That could be a very, very interesting one there. Ohio State does have to go on the road in Madison to play the Wisconsin Badgers. Oklahoma's on the road to play the Kansas Jayhawks. Texas is playing a BYU team that's looked really, really good so far this season. Tulane has got to go on the road and play a pretty sneaky Rice team. I mean, you're talking about Tennessee going on the road to play Kentucky. North Carolina, who just got upset, we'll talk about that one later, is on the road at Georgia Tech. And then Oregon State has a very tough one on the road against Arizona. So don't trust anyone, guys. No one is safe. Upsets are going to hit every single conference as they have done so far this season. Let's go ahead and move on into some more specific takeaways. You guys know I like my broad takeaways. So let's dive on into the Pac-12, because we kind of figured that the Pac-12 really had been, for the most part, pretty decided. It was Washington and Oregon in a tier of their own, and then everybody else. And I feel like a lot of people are still going to feel that way, even after the events that transpired this past week. But again, as we just talked about, Oregon needed a little bit to get past Washington State. Washington needed pretty much almost 50 minutes, maybe even almost 55 minutes to get past the Arizona State Sun Devils, and then the Huskies were able to pull away, right? So, and then, okay, so the Huskies are the only undefeated team left in the Pac-12. Probably still the clear front runner there, but Oregon is right hot on their right hot on their tail, if not for a couple calls that maybe could have gone the other way, and if not for a field goal that got hooked. What happens if that kick gets made? Who knows? Maybe Oregon ends up winning that game against Washington in overtime. The game really was that close. I still believe it is these two teams at the top of the Pac-12, but you read the headline there, the Pac-12 is doing the thing again, and the thing being cannibalizing itself, being eating itself alive, being beating each other up. Now, with the strength of the Pac-12 conference coming into the season, it was going to be a very, very good possibility that this conference was not going to get a team in the college football playoff simply because there are just a lot of really, really good teams in the Pac-12 conference. I mean, you go ahead and look at any ranking poll out there, including my top 25 that's going to come out later on today. You got the Oregon State Beavers that are still sitting there with one loss. Of course, we know Utah USC was kind of a de facto elimination game there. USC still sits with one conference loss, but now is 2 total after they lost to Utah. Utah's only loss being to the Oregon State Beavers. UCLA could still play themselves into the mix here, and there are still a lot of important games left to go. Like I said, Oregon State's got to go on the road and play the Arizona Wildcats. That's going to be a sneaky game. Arizona can spoil the party for a lot of teams, as they did with Washington State and as they almost did with USC as well. And you got Utah and Oregon coming up next week. So still a lot of big games to go in the Pac-12 conference. It's going to be a very interesting race to the finish here to see if one team can come out on top and maybe get into the college football playoff. Let's go ahead and stay in the Pac-12, and we're going to talk about a specific game here because, well, the kryptonite showed up again, didn't it, Lincoln Riley? I really don't know what to say that's already been said. I don't plan on talking too long about this just because I feel like, well, everything that's needed to be said about USC, about this game, well, has been said, right? I mean, USC coming into this game, coming off of a very, very disappointing performance against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, we're looking to bounce back. We're looking for that big performance to really springboard them back into the national conversation because a lot of people were doubting them here from this game. And, well, the doubters are even louder now because, I mean, it's the same problems with USC, right? The offense is great, and Caleb Williams is amazing. However, Caleb Williams did not have a touchdown pass in this game. The Utah defense, and pretty much, well, I should say Utah as a whole, not just the Utah defense, although that was a super huge part of it, but Utah as a whole proved yet again that physicality is the way to beat USC. They were by far the more physical team. They forced USC into some situations that were not beneficial to Caleb Williams and company at all, and it led to USC's demise. What they also proved is you don't need a Cam Rising to go out and beat USC. Guys, they just went out and beat USC, and they beat this defense with Bryson Barnes. Now, albeit Bryson Barnes did play really, really well. 14 of 23, 235 yards, 3 touchdowns, and only 1 pick. Jaquindon Jackson, Sion Vaki, the 2 running backs there were good. Even Bryson Barnes was putting it on the ground, running the football there as well. Sion Vaki had a monster day receiving for the Utes as well. But I am not trying to throw shade at Bryson Barnes. Again, I just read you the numbers, and my personal opinion, I think Bryson Barnes is a very, very good quarterback. But when you take a look at the name Bryson Barnes, that is not a household name, and he was able to carve up this USC defense along with that Utah run game as well. It's time for USC and Lincoln Riley to answer the hard questions, and it's time for them to look at themselves 6 inches from the mirror and say there is an issue here and it needs to be figured out, because it's the same problems that have plagued Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma while during his time in Norman. It's plagued him for so long here while he was, or I should say, it's plagued him for the time that he is here with the USC Trojans, and it was supposed to get a lot better this year, and it hasn't. It's the same old, same old. Lincoln Riley's got to look at himself in the mirror and say, hey, this is a problem. We got to get it figured out, because USC now out of the college football playoff race. That may very well push Caleb Williams out of the Heisman contention there as well, although he's still one of the best players in America. So we'll see how long that train is able to stay away from the station. But Utah with a big-time marquee win. The bigger storyline here, though, is that USC has got some questions to answer moving forward, especially that you're going to go in a very physical conference with defenses like the Buckeyes and the Nittany Lions and the Wolverines next year in the Big Ten Conference. Something's got to change. USC has got to get more physical in a hurry. But a very, very good win for the Utah Utes. Cam Rising is not going to play anymore this year, so we'll see how far Bryson Barnes and company are going to be able to get this Ute team. Big one coming up against the Ducks next week. All right, let's go ahead and move on in here to the ACC, where we have an upset to talk about, ladies and gentlemen. The North Carolina Tar Heels, a team that was getting on a roll, and a team that it felt like, well, this was an offense that we know has a lot of weapons, and a defense that just feels like, hey, it had improved from a season ago, and it just lost to not even arguably one of the worst teams in the country in the Virginia Cavaliers. Now, albeit Virginia probably played one of their best games of the season, but when you talk about a top 10 team with North Carolina losing at home to a Virginia team that, what was the final line here on this game? I got to get that for you guys right here. North Carolina was favored by 24 points, and North Carolina could not get it done. They lost the game while gaining 490 yards, and they had the same amount of first downs as Virginia did, with only one turnover, and Virginia had two. So, Nate, what really led North Carolina to lose this game? Well, I don't think the defense was as aggressive as it needed to be at points throughout this game. I mean, Tony Muskett, the Monmouth transfer coming into Virginia, was 20 of 30 for 208 yards. This was a Virginia rushing attack that rushed for 228 yards and 3 touchdowns. And this was also a North Carolina team that at times just looked very, very flat offensively. I think it was a combination of North Carolina not really being on their game versus Virginia being on their game. And probably one of the worst performances from North Carolina this year, and one of the best performances from Virginia this year. So with that loss out of the way, I don't really trust North Carolina right now. Of course, Duke just lost to the Florida State Seminoles, so it is up to Florida State to keep the ACC alive for the playoffs. And how much do we trust Florida State now, right? The only reason they were able to pull away from Duke, and albeit Riley Leonard was not having a great statistical game, but he was impacting the game in a very, very big way. He went out in the third quarter, and it was from that point on that the Florida State Seminoles were able to take over and then win that game against the Duke Blue Devils. So, with the Florida State Seminoles, it is up to them to keep the ACC alive and pretty much keep any hope alive that the ACC has of making the college football playoff. We'll see what happens with the ACC here moving forward. Florida State, a little bit of a shaky performance against Duke. They were able to pull away. They did look very good, albeit with Riley Leonard out in the third and fourth quarter. Still believe Florida State is a top 5 team, but this is a team that has definitely got to get some inconsistency issues figured out here moving forward if they want to keep their hopes for the college football playoff alive. But guys, the number one takeaway comes from the biggest game of the weekend, the top 10 showdown in Columbus, Ohio. And this game not only showed me that Ohio State has a new identity, but the bigger takeaway here is that Penn State is still behind the Michigan and the Ohio State or I should say the Michigans and the Ohio States of the world in the Big Ten East pecking order. A lot of Penn State fans coming into the year said, hey, this is going to be the team that makes a jump. This is going to be the team that beats at least one of the big two in the Big Ten East, and it doesn't look like that is going to be the case. Very uninspired offensive performance from the Penn State Nittany Lions. Not a whole lot of creativity. We know that Drew Aller couldn't really get the football downfield all season long. That hasn't really been a strength of his, and he doesn't have the wheels to get outside of the pocket. You were going to have to try that against the Buckeye defense that played really well, and it just didn't happen. Now, albeit, this is the Buckeye defense that played very, very well. It is a Buckeye team that as a whole, Buckeye fans have dramatically switched to being an offense-first team over pretty much the entirety of Ryan Day's tenure. So now this year, this is a defense-first team with some of the best weapons in the entire country offensively, which is very, very scary. If you have the best wide receiver in college football and you're calling yourselves, I don't think Ohio State's calling themselves, but myself included, including a lot of people that follow this sport very, very closely, are calling Ohio State a defense-first team. And I would fully 100% agree with that standpoint, but they also have some of the best weapons in the entire country. That is very, very scary. Bigger takeaway here is Penn State still feels like they're a year away. Now, Drew Aller comes back. There are a lot of weapons that comes back, albeit some good pieces on defense leave from this season. So moving forward, maybe it's next year that Penn State will have to try, but given the way that they played this game against the Ohio State Buckeyes, defense I thought looked very good for the Penn State Nittany Lions. But moving forward, if you want a shot to beat Michigan, you got to play a lot better offensively than you did here in this game. However, you have to give credit where credit is due. This Ohio State defense is so much improved from even last season, where it already took a big jump from seasons past. This is an Ohio State team that's a defense-first team. It's adjusted to what all the critics have been saying, and it is proven that they are one of the best teams in the entire country. And the Ohio State Buckeyes could definitely be back on top of the Big Ten. We're going to have to wait until November 25th to find out who out of Ohio State and Michigan are, again, atop of the Big Ten. Michigan has still got that game against Penn State, and they just absolutely throttled Michigan State. They look like the best team in the country. That matchup on November 25th. Oh boy, that's going to look really, that's just going to be a splendid, splendid game to watch. But guys, those are my top 5 takeaways here from the week in college football. If you have any more takeaways, please leave them in the comment section down below. But until next time, guys, my top 25 video comes out later today. Remember to play hard, but tailgate harder. I'll see all you guys in the next video. Goodbye.